Good evening, Judge Adams.
Good evening, Chief Justice and esteemed members of the JSC.
Thank you very much for availing yourself for this interview, for consideration for a position in the Electoral Court. You might have been waiting for quite some time, but we are able to interview you now. You practiced as an attorney for quite a long time before you were appointed as a judge, is that right?
That's correct, Chief Justice. Just over 27 years as a practicing attorney.
Yes. You hold the degree of B.Proc, is that right?
Yes, I do, from Wits University.
Yes. And you were appointed as a judge in 2017? Or was it 2019?
No, it was the 20th of January 2017, Chief Justice.
So you have been a judge in the High Court for about, what, 6 years?
Yeah, just under 7 years.
Just under 7 years.
I'll be completing my 7th year at the end of this year.
Yes. Have you acted in the Electoral Court or in any structure that deals with elections?
I haven't, Chief Justice. As far as I'm aware, that there's no acting appointments in the Electoral Court. So I haven't had the opportunity to act in the Electoral Court.
So you have got to learn the job somewhere else and come in when you know the job.
I have to read myself into matters as and when,
yes.
as and when they occur.
Okay. What exposure have you had in dealing with electoral disputes?
Again, Chief Justice,
experience?
I haven't had much. I was involved very peripherally in a matter. I think it may have been with the elections in 2019, which came before me as an urgent application. Prisoners were applying to have the minister compelled to provide identity documents, but that was the sum total of my involvement in the matter. It was struck from the roll for lack of urgency, because it was a carbon copy of an application that had been brought 4 years before that. So I read the documents that was handed to me on the morning of the matter. I heard the parties, and I had to deal with the matter because the elections were commencing the next week or so.
Have you performed the duties of an electoral officer in any of our national, provincial or local government elections?
I haven't.
Or presiding officer in elections?
I haven't, Chief Justice. I've not been involved in the electoral process at all.
You say you have not?
I have not.
Oh, right from 1994 up to now, you have not?
I haven't, no. My involvement was...
What have you done in your life that shows that you have an interest in electoral matters other than going to vote?
Chief Justice, again, in preparation for my interview, I had read up on the applicable legal framework and the legislative framework. I've other than following what happens to the elections from on every time they come around, I have not had any involvement. But I obviously have a keen interest in this particular branch of the law.
You have not shown interest before in electoral matters, electoral disputes?
I haven't, no.
Yes. What has made you to decide to avail yourself then?
Yeah, Chief Justice, I think the point about electoral law and election law, it relates to this fundamental right to vote, which is enshrined in our Constitution. It goes to the very heart of our constitutional democracy, and having been on the bench for the last six plus years, I thought that maybe I can make a contribution in this particular field and familiarize myself with the legal principles applicable, in addition to developing into this particular branch of the law, which, like I say, I have developed a keen interest in it over the last few months or so. I was also a bit surprised that in April of this year, there were no people coming forward to make themselves available for this position, especially in view of the fact that we're dealing with such an important branch of the law that goes to the very heart of our democracy.
What is the mandate of the Electoral Commission, the IEC?
Chief Justice, the Electoral Commission, its main mandate is to organize, arrange, and manage elections of the legislative bodies nationally, provincially, and in respect of local government.
Yes. And how many commissioners does it consist of?
It's 5 commissioners.
And how many judges and non-judge members does the Electoral Court consist of?
It's constituted by 5 members in total. 3 of those members are judges.
Yes.
2 of those are ordinary South African citizens.
Yes. And the terms of appointment?
For the Electoral Court is 7 years.
Yes.
And for the Electoral Commission also 7 years.
Yes. Decisions that are made by the Electoral Court, where do you go if you want to take them on appeal?
As a general rule, Chief Justice, decisions of the Electoral Court is not appealable. It is the final arbiter in all matters relating to elections, excepting only that you can take a decision of the Electoral Court to the Constitutional Court if it implicates a constitutional matter, or if there's other grounds for jurisdiction in respect of a particular matter.
Are you familiar with the Khan judgment of the Constitutional Court relating to elections?
I can't say that the Khan judgment.
Yes.
Sure, I may have read in the matters that I read, but off the top of my head, I can't say that I'm familiar with it.
You have not read it? It's quite an important judgment for somebody who is interested in electoral matters.
Yeah.
There was also another judgment of the Constitutional Court involving the IEC just before the last elections. Do you remember that one? That was brought as an urgent application. I think it was urgent. Do you remember that one?
Are you referring to the New Nation matter, Chief Justice?
No.
No.
An IEC matter. The last one that the Constitutional Court dealt with.
Yes, yeah, okay. This is the matter relating to the postponement of the last elections.
Yes. What can you tell us to show that you are, you know what was decided, you know what was the issue, what the issues were in that matter?
In sum, Chief Justice, what the matter decided was simply that the Constitution provides that elections are to be held regularly. Free and fair elections are to be held regularly, and the time period for having those elections are not to be deviated from as a general rule, and possibly never, unless, of course, there are better grounds that had been given other than the ones that were given in that particular matter by the IEC. So in sum, what the Constitutional Court said, that the Constitution provides that we should have regular elections, we should comply with that constitutional imperative, and the election should proceed, despite the difficulties that had been raised on behalf of the Electoral Commission.
Yes. And what is the significance of addresses of voters that the IEC must keep?
The significance of that relates to the ward in which you're supposed to cast your vote. In terms of the legislation, each particular individual must vote in the ward that they have, in respect of which they have the address for a particular voter.
And what is the problem that happens if no addresses are kept?
I seem to recall that the Constitutional Court said that that must be done by the Electoral Commission, and every effort must be made in order to comply with that requirement. And if it's not complied with, then a person is not allowed to vote.
Why is a person not allowed to vote? If what is the mischief that is sought to be addressed by the requirement that there must be addresses kept by the IEC?
I think that it's just to verify the validity of the voter's roll and the veracity of the voter's roll, Chief Justice.
I'm now going to allow the chairperson of the Electoral Court, Justice Zondi, to put questions to you.
Yes.
Justice Zondi.
Thank you, Chief Justice.
Switch on your mic.
Good evening, fellow commissioners, and good evening.
I must welcome you. I welcome you, and I must also welcome the President of the Supreme Court of Appeal, because both of you were not here earlier. Okay. You are most welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good evening, Judge Adams.
Good evening, Justice Zondi.
I see that while we have already, in exchange that you have had with the Chief Justice, you have indicated that you have got no experience on the electoral law jurisprudence. And I see, I've just gone through your papers, and that there's not even a single case that you had referred to in which which deals with electoral law. But judging from the manner in which you write, I don't see that there will be any problem for you to sort of get you up to speed with the electoral law jurisprudence, because I can see from the cases that are in the bundle that you are the kind of a person who applies himself to what is before you. The BLA has expressed concern, well, besides supporting you, the BLA has expressed concern about the number of reserved judgment at the time of the application, bearing in mind that this court, it's electoral law, it's by nature urgent. Cases in the electoral court are urgent and they should be dealt with expeditiously. Would you be able to deal with the cases as soon as possible?
Yes. Thanks for the question, Justice Zondi. I agree with you. The 3 judgments that I mentioned in my application had obviously since been handed down, and they had been reserved shortly before In fact, two of them were reserved shortly before I had submitted my application. So I don't think that should be a concern of the JSC. And then, but as far as judgments are concerned, I normally, and as a general rule, hand down my judgments as soon as I possibly can. Since submitting in the last term, for example, I had set in the urgent court and I'd set in opposed motions. I think it may very well have been back to back or 1 week apart. And all of the judgments in the urgent court I had handed down by the following Tuesday, following the urgent court. So as happens, I'm assuming, in the electoral court, you put aside whatever you do when you're sitting in the electoral court and you deal with those matters as and when they arise, as I normally do when I sit in the urgent court. And I understand that this court requires that you deal with matters as and when they come before you.
Have you sort of acquainted yourself with the legal framework and statutory framework that applies in the in the electoral court matters?
I most certainly have, Justice Zondi.
Would you just indicate me the basic or the most important statutory provisions?
Yeah. Obviously,
Starting with the Constitution, obviously.
The very basis of electoral law and election law is obviously the Constitution and the founding provisions that provides that are the values that our South Africa is founded on, is that of universal adult suffrage, a national common voters' roll, regular elections, and a multi-party system of democratic government to ensure accountability, responsiveness, and openness. So that is in the founding provisions of the Constitution. All of that is then specifically dealt with in Section 19 of the Bill of Rights of the Constitution, which deals with all of the political rights. I think importantly, every adult citizen has the right to vote in election for any legislative body established in terms of the Constitution, and to do so in secret, and then to stand for public office and, if elected, to hold office. On the basis of that, the legislature then enacted the Electoral Commission Act, 51 of 1966, which provided for the creation and the existence of your Electoral Commission, as well as for the creation of an electoral court, and it provides for the powers, the composition of the electoral court, the powers, duties, and function of the electoral court, as well as for that of the Electoral Commission. Importantly, as far as the powers of the electoral court is concerned, that is dealt with in Section 20 of the Electoral Commission Act. And as far as I could determine, Justice Zondi, the important provision relates to the Section 4, Section 20, subsection 4, which says that the electoral court shall determine which courts of law shall have jurisdiction to hear particular disputes and complaints about infringements and appeals against decisions arising from such hearing. And pursuant to that provision in 1998, the rules of the electoral court were enacted, gazetted, and in terms of Rule 2, the High Court, the Magistrates Court, the High Court, and the Electoral Court are empowered to adjudicate matters relating to electoral matters.
All right. Without going into details as to what the provisions of the Act state, all that I wanted to establish from you is just the legal framework that there's a Constitution, then there's an Electoral Act, and then there's an Electoral Commissions Act, and then there's a Local Government Municipal Electoral Act. These are the instruments that you must sort of acquaint yourself with in order to be able to function effectively in this court. During the exchange that you had with the Chief Justice, you said the decisions of the of the electoral court are not appealable. Am I correct in my understanding? Is that what you said? Or?
Yeah, I seem to recall reading one of the provisions that said it is a decision of the electoral court, or the electoral court is the final arbiter in matters relating to elections and electoral disputes. And that the only time that you can appeal a decision of the electoral court is if it implicates constitutional court matters, and the appeal would be to the constitutional court.
Well, those matters are the matters that deal with the electoral act. It's section 99. It is about violations of the code of electoral, the electoral code.
Yeah.
But so far as other matters are concerned, there is an appeal. I mean, if you had read the case of the DA versus IEC, it's a matter that started at the electoral court and it went to the SCA. So yeah, they do the appeals from electoral court
To the Supreme Court.
do go to the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
And another thing that I picked up during the exchange between you and the Chief Justice is the significance of your address. I did not. Why is it important for the voters to be registered? What is the mischief that was sought to be dealt with by requiring the voters to be registered at a particular ward?
Yeah.
What is the significance of registration?
One of the duties of the Electoral Commission is to prepare the voters' roll in respect of national, provincial, and local government elections. And the significance, my understanding, Justice Ondi, is that is to assist the Electoral Court in properly preparing and having a verified voters' roll that can be used as per the Electoral Act.
Well,
Yeah.
I would have expected the answer that says is to avoid a situation where the voters will be passed from a ward, like maybe there is by-election in Ward B and people who are not resident in Ward B, who are resident in Ward A would be passed into
Yeah.
Ward A in order to increase the numbers. That's
Yeah.
the mischief that was sought to be prevented.
Violation.
There is a case that you referred to in your bundle, is it Manaka versus University of Wits? Is it page 7, number 9?
Yes.
You said the significance of that case, the courts to guard against exercise of administrative statutory power. I read that case, but I was unable to see the connection between what you have written here and what the case was all about. Because that case was basically about the student who had been refused registration, a student who was supposed to register for MP, CHB, the third year.
The
in
medical,
medicine.
yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it came to you as they were seeking an interdict, is that correct?
It was in the urgent court, yes.
Yes,
Justice
yes,
Ondi.
yes.
Yes, yeah.
But, and you refused the interdict. But in the report, well, in your summary, you said courts to guard against exercise of administrative statutory power. What does it mean?
Well, what in essence happened in that matter, Justice Ondi, was that the decision had been made by the university on the basis of their internal policies, and it went through the whole process of the internal processes at the university, and ultimately the decision was that he wasn't going to be allowed back into this particular degree, but he was given alternatives as well. So the point that was made by the judgment was that it is not sometimes for the court to deal with these administrative issues, provided it falls within the ambit of the four corners of the law. And I couldn't find anything wrong with the administrative decision in that particular matter.
Okay, well, yeah. I'm not sure if I follow the reasoning, because if there was something wrong with the policy of the university, and to refuse to re-register a student who was in year number 3 in medicine, the relief that was sought, if there was a case made out for it, you could have granted it relief. Why would you defer to the administrative mechanism of the university? You know? Because are you assuming that the university is always correct in the application of their policies?
Well, that was the assumption that I made, that the policy, there was nothing wrong with the policy. It had made provision to hear their side of the story. It also made provision for practical issues, like we had already gone to about March, and he would have lost out in a number of the studies that he was supposed to do. And for all of those reasons, I couldn't see myself clear to grant the order.
All right. Thank you, Chief Justice.
Thank you. Minister? You are covered. Okay. Commissioner Singh?
Thank you very much, Chief Justice, and good evening, Judge Adams.
Yeah. Good evening, Commissioner Singh.
I think it's common knowledge that those of us sitting on this side of the House, except the Minister there, live, breathe, and eat elections. So it's our everyday occupation. We are here because of elections. So we need to know, we need to be assured that whoever sits on the Electoral Court is somebody that can adjudicate matters, because the two of us here, two parties, may be going to court, as we've done often in matters of Electoral Court. So I just want to know, Judge Adams, are you aware of the groundbreaking judgment recently, well, a few years ago, by the Constitutional Court with regard to the recognition of independence to contest election? What is your view on it? I know the Apex Court has decided on it, and we just have to implement as Parliament, which has been quite difficult for us. But what is your view on it? And there are going to be many challenges moving forward from these independents, and this court is going to be busy. And from what you've told us here, you seem not to have had any experience in electoral matters. How is it going to be possible for you to hit the ground running when such disputes arise? And having said that, you know, we don't have to wait for a national or provincial election for disputes. There are by-elections almost on a weekly basis. And even arising out of by-elections, we have matters referred to the court. Just like your view on that.
Yes. Yeah, Commissioner Singh, I suppose that you're referring to the New Nation matter, which I have read and which I'm familiar, and the Constitutional Court has obviously decided on provision should be made in the legislation for independence to stand in national and provincial elections. So I don't know if there's anything else that you want me to say. The Constitutional Court has decided on it. I agree with you that there's already been subsequent litigation arising from that judgment, including the Constitutional Court challenge to the amendment to the Electoral Act, which is, as we speak, before the Constitutional Court. So in answer to your question, I'm familiar with the principles relating to that. I also understand what the issues were that were before the Constitutional Court. It related specifically to the redistribution of the votes, for example, in the case of an independent, his votes not being counted anymore. And then there's also the requirements that the amendment had imposed in respect of independence, and that has been challenged. But like you say, I can't agree with you more that there are going to be a lot of issues and disputes arising from whatever comes out of the Constitutional Court judgment relating to independence.
Just one more question, Chief Justice. Judge Adams, you availed yourself for this position, and you said early on you're surprised that it was only you. Now, I'd just like to ask you maybe a question which is, did you avail yourself because of the passion you have for elections, the country, the electoral system, or you just wanted to do something different from what you do on a daily basis?
No, it's not that, Commissioner Singh. It is, I have a passion for my country. I have a keen interest in electoral law. I have not had a lot of exposure, but if given the opportunity, I most certainly will familiarize myself even more with the applicable legal principles. I most certainly am not doing just for my self-interest. I'm doing it because I have a keen interest in electoral law and the political rights of our citizens.
Thank you, Chief Justice.
Thank you, Commissioners. We are at 8:09. Justice Molimela.
Yes, thank you. Good evening, Judge Adams.
Good evening, President.
Thank you. You have already considered that aspects that relate to electoral law are relatively a relatively new area of the law for you. Am I correct?
Yes, it most certainly is, Madam President.
Yes, and you have been a judge of one of the busiest courts in the country, Gauteng, for about 7 years, you said?
Just under 7 years, yes.
Just under 7 years. I would imagine you have worked quite frequently in what is normally referred to as the agent court in that division.
Yeah, I do at least one week in any given term, Madam President.
Yes, and you mentioned that you have delivered your judgments relatively quickly. In fact, you said you deliver them the very next Tuesday.
In the urgent court, and sometimes I also try to do the same in the opposed motion court.
Do you think that this experience of having acted in the agent court will assist you in terms of your adaptation now in this relatively new area of the law?
I most certainly think so, Madam President. Just on that point, before my elevation to the bench, I had very little exposure to a number of branches of the law, including tax law and including intellectual property. In practice, I had very little exposure to these branches of law. But since my elevation to the bench, I have familiarized myself with the principles in those branches of law, including tax matters. I've written three judgments in fairly complicated tax matters. One of them went to the Supreme Court of Appeal and upheld my judgment. So the point that I'm trying to make is that whilst I have not had any exposure to electoral law at this point in time, I most certainly believe that I have the capacity and the ability to familiarize myself with the applicable legal principles.
Now, lastly, Chief Justice, can you give this body the assurance that, with the knowledge that you are working in one of the busiest courts and that you need to have that adaptation, you will be in a position to hit the ground running? We'll be having elections, general elections very, very soon, and I imagine that court is going to be very, very busy. By its nature, it's an agent court. Matters are dealt with on an agent basis. It would seem that you do not have a lot of runway to taxi on in terms of you taking off now in that area of the law. So it means that you should be able to, as it were, hit the ground running. Can you give us the assurance that you will be able to do that so that when the time comes, you are able to adjudicate those disputes swiftly and also give your judgments promptly?
Yes, Madam President, I can give that assurance and that undertaking without fear of contradiction. I know that I have the capacity and the ability to do that.
Thank you, Chief Justice.
Commissioner Nyambi.
I'm covered.
You are covered, thank you. I don't see any other hand. Just one last maybe comment. Judge Adams, I would have thought that if you didn't have much exposure or experience in electoral law or election matters, as you say you haven't had, I would have thought that that would have served as motivation for you to really read and familiarize yourself a lot with the few important judgments on electoral law of the Constitutional Court, such as Khan. I would have thought that you would have said, look, I don't have experience, but if they ask me about these judgments, I'll be very ready. I'll read them, because there are not too many.
Yeah, no, I can't agree with you more, Chief Justice. I spent a lot of time in the last 2 weeks reading up on the Electoral Commission Act, the Electoral Act itself. I've read the judgments, but I clearly missed that one. I thought that I had done a lot of preparation, but clearly not.
Okay.
But I agree with you that I should have maybe done a bit more.
Okay, all right. No, thank you very much. We have come to the end of this interview. Thank you for availing yourself. We appreciate it very much. You are now excused.
Yes, thank you, Chief Justice, and thank you to the other commissioners of the JSE.
Thank you.